The Boer Wars were two significant military conflicts that shaped the history of South Africa and influenced the power dynamics of the British Empire at the turn of the 20th century. These wars were fought between the British Empire and the Boer settlers, also known as Afrikaners, who were descendants of Dutch, German, and French Huguenot settlers living in the southern tip of Africa. The two wars, fought from 1880 to 1881 and 1899 to 1902, were rooted in complex issues involving land, political independence, and control over valuable resources such as gold and diamonds. By the late 19th century, the British Empire had expanded its control over much of southern Africa. However, two independent Boer republics remained: the South Africa Republic, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. The Boers, fiercely independent and deeply committed to preserving their self-rule, resisted British interference. This tension would ultimately lead to war. The First Boer War, also called the Transvaal War, broke out in December 1880. Its main cause was Britain's 1877 annexation of the Transvaal, which many Boers considered an illegitimate act. The Boers were determined to regain their independence, and they launched a revolt against British forces. Although the war was relatively small in scale, it was significant because it showcased the military skill of the Boers, who were expert marksmen and skilled horsemen. The conflict was characterized by a series of skirmishes and small battles, most notably the Battle of Majuba Hill in February 1881, where Boer fighters inflicted a decisive defeat on British troops. The loss shocked Britain and forced it to reconsider its approach to the conflict. The war ended with the signing of the Pretoria Convention in August 1881, which granted the Transvaal self-government under British suzerainty. While Britain retained some control, the Boers saw this as a victory that restored their independence. However, peace was short-lived. The discovery of gold in the Witwatersrand region of the Transvaal in 1886 transformed the area into one of the richest gold fields in the world. This discovery attracted thousands of British and other foreign prospectors, known as Edelanders, straining relations between the Boer governments and Britain once again. The Boer republics feared losing their political autonomy as British settlers grew in number and demanded voting rights. The Second Boer War, which began in October 1899, was far more intense and destructive than the first. This conflict was sparked by years of growing hostility between the Boer republics and the British Empire. Britain wanted to secure control over the mineral-rich Transvaal, while the Boers, led by President Paul Kruger, were determined to maintain their independence and limit the political power of British settlers, the Uitlanders, who were flooding the region due to the gold rush. Tensions reached a breaking point when the Boers issued an ultimatum demanding that Britain withdraw its troops from the borders of the Boer republics. When Britain refused, the Boers declared war. At the start, the Boers surprised many by taking the offensive, launching sieges on key British-held towns such as Ladysmith, Mafeking, and Kimberley. Their commandos, small groups of highly mobile fighters, used guerrilla tactics, exploiting their knowledge of the terrain and their skill as sharpshooters to harass British forces. The first phase of the war, late 1900 to early 1904, became known as the Black Week for Britain, as it suffered humiliating defeats in battles such as Colenso, Majuba and Stormberg. These losses shocked the British public and government, forcing them to pour reinforcements into the war effort. By early 1900, under the command of Field Marshal Lord Roberts and later Lord Kitchener, the British launched a massive counteroffensive. They relieved the besieged towns and captured the Boer capitals of Bloemfontein, Orange Free State, and Pretoria, Transvaal. This marked the beginning of the second phase of the war, as the British believed the conflict was effectively over. However, the Boers refused to surrender and shifted to a guerrilla campaign. The Guerrilla War, 1900 to 1902, proved costly and frustrating for the British. Boer fighters struck supply lines, ambushed patrols, and used hit-and-run tactics that kept the British Army constantly on alert. In response, the British adopted a scorched-earth policy, burning Boer farms and destroying crops to cut off support for the fighters. One of the most controversial strategies employed by the British was the establishment of concentration camps. Thousands of Boer civilians, including women and children, were forcibly relocated to these camps under harsh conditions. Poor sanitation, inadequate food, and disease caused the deaths of over 26,000 Boer women and children, as well as many black Africans caught in the war zone. The suffering in these camps became a major scandal back in Britain and fueled international criticism of the British war effort. By 1902, both sides were exhausted. The Boer guerrilla forces, though determined, were running out of supplies, ammunition, and safe havens. The British had deployed over 400,000 troops, the largest imperial force ever assembled at that time, and their relentless scorched-earth campaign gradually broke Boer resistance. On May 31, 1902, the war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Vereeniging. Under the treaty's terms, the Boers acknowledged British sovereignty over the Transvaal and the Orange Free State, effectively bringing both republics under British rule. However, the agreement was not entirely one-sided. Britain promised to eventually grant self-government to the former Boer republics and agreed to pay £3 million in reconstruction aid to help rebuild farms and infrastructure destroyed during the war. The Boers were also allowed to retain their language, Afrikaans, which was important for their sense of identity. The aftermath of the Second Boer War was profound. For Britain, the war had been unexpectedly costly, both financially and in terms of lives lost. Over 22,000 British soldiers were killed, and the war sparked intense debate at home about military tactics, colonial policy, and the moral implications of the concentration camps. For the Boers, the war was devastating. More than 7,000 fighters died, and tens of thousands of civilians perished from hunger and disease. Yet, despite their defeat, the Boers' resilience laid the groundwork for their political resurgence. In 1910, just 8 years after the war ended, the British government granted self-government and unified the British colonies and former Boer republics into the Union of South Africa, a dominion within the British Empire. This arrangement gave significant political power to the Afrikaner population and set the stage for the rise of Afrikaner nationalism and the decades that followed. The Boer Wars also had wider global implications. They revealed the challenges of maintaining a vast empire in an age of growing nationalism, and contributed to reforms in the British military, which modernized its tactics and organization after learning hard lessons from the conflict. Additionally, the war highlighted the brutality of imperial conquest and became a turning point in how the world viewed British colonialism. In South Africa, the legacy of the Boer Wars lived on for generations. The conflicts deepened divisions between the British settlers and the Afrikaners, as well as between white settlers and the black African majority, who were largely excluded from the post-war political settlement. These tensions would play a major role in shaping South Africa's racial and political history throughout the 20th century.